KMRE 102.3 FM in Bellingham. Your community, your voice, your station. I'm Matt Benoit, and this is Are You Serious? The talk comedy program where we talk to local Bellingham comedians about some of the most interesting intersections of sort of unusual things or depressing things and how that intersects with how they get up on stage and talk about stuff. So I'm here today with Brady Secules.
Secules. Yeah.
Hey. Succules, you know what
Succubus.
your name is. I don't know how many
Sea
different
cucumber.
ways it's been pronounced.
Like 11 at least.
11. Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot. The most common thing I have to tell show hosts is they just do your best, give it your best shot, and I'll correct you from there once I get to the mic.
What kind of last name is that? What's the origin?
I believe it's Sicilian,
Okay.
but I'm not 100% sure on that. I tried going on Ancestry.com, and there was like nothing on us. So
That's interesting.
or at least within the free version.
Your
'cause
love
I
of
didn't pay
pizza.
anything.
Your love of pizza makes way more sense now.
Yeah, it does. Doesn't
yeah.
it?
It's a genetic thing.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
This one time, a more serious question about life, this kid came up to me and he's like, my friend's older brother had to have an intervention. What's an intervention? I'm like, oh, it's like a surprise party where no one is happy. And there's no cake. Or like this one time, this real little kid came up to me and he's like, what's stealing? And I'm like, stealing is like sharing without consent. And he's like, well, what's consent? And I'm like, consent is what you get from a lady before you get anything else from a lady. Right, it's a joke about consensual sex with a positive message. I'm killing it.
What are your first memories of like seeing stand-up or any sort of comedy where you're like, oh, that's a thing people do?
Yeah, I was raised really sheltered, so I actually didn't see a lot of secular entertainment until till like high school or maybe even later. I don't remember being aware even of stand-up comedy until I was in high school. I was hanging out with some friends. We were going somewhere in the car, and someone put on a Dane Cook CD. And the first joke I remember ever witnessing, and it was just on the car radio, was his whole bit about working at Burger King at the BK Lounge. And, well, I can't say some of those words he says, but just that whole bit. But at the time, I was very sheltered, and so I was concerned and offended by it. And I was like, oh, people can't do this. But that was the very first time I remember experiencing stand-up.
So you go from that to when was the first time you thought I could do this or I want to try this?
It was after high school. It was actually after Bible college. So I went to Bible college. I came back. I was probably 20 at that point. And I got a job at a grocery store because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And my buddy who worked at the grocery store knew some people in Cincinnati. And he's like, hey, let's go crash at this house in Cincinnati. Just basically squat in his very sketchy house, like the house from like Fight Club. It was like really gross for like a week and just hang out there. And so I wanted reading material for the airplane. And so I went into a Barnes & Noble before we left, and I was looking at the new release books, and I saw a copy of Russell Brand's My Bookie Wook, because it's hot pink, and he looks like just like a sex symbol on the cover. And I was like, oh, that's intriguing. And it says like My Bookie Wook, a memoir of sex, drugs, and stand-up. And so I picked that up and read through it and thought it was very interesting, just this whole like the trajectory of his life. And at that point I started thinking I could maybe do that. I've always liked telling stories. And he kind of came out of nowhere and became a very successful at what he does. So that's when I got intrigued by stand-up and thought maybe it was a possibility.
So how long after that did you actually do it and go up?
Yeah, so after that, I kind of started playing around with the idea of it. I started writing jokes a little bit in a notebook, but I didn't actually get on stage until probably like 4.5 years later. In the meantime, I got married and I got divorced, and there was other priorities. And then my life stabilized to the point where I was like, I should try getting on stage. So My first time was at the Upfront Theater. I was walking around downtown Bellingham, and I saw a poster for, if you want to join us, do stand-up on the Upfront stage, mail us at whatever. So I sent them an email, and they got back to me, and I had like a month to prepare. So that was kind of my way of saying, okay, I have a month deadline to come up with my first set. I did, I think, like 6 minutes. It went really well. Because at the Upfront, it's a paying audience. They're all there to see a comedy show. So it went very good for my first time. I had really practiced the crap out of my stuff. And it went super good. So after that first show, I was like, I'm a boss at this. I'm the best. So my first set was at the Upfront. My next several were at just the open mic at the Green Frog. And that's a very different type of audience. And so I... bombed horribly, and it took me a long time to figure out what the difference was, that being the type of audience. They're a bar crowd at that open mic. They're not necessarily there to watch comedy, so it took me a long time to figure that out. But just want to clarify that I was quickly humbled and didn't continue thinking I was amazing.
I got in a confrontation with the Boy Scouts this last weekend. This really happened. I was in front of a shopping center, and I was just kind of cruising through, and there was Boy Scouts with their table, and they're selling popcorn. One of them was like, "Hey, mister, you want to buy a bag of popcorn and support the Boy Scouts?" And I was like, "I like popcorn. I like the Boy Scouts. Sure, why not? How much?" And he was like, $15. And I was like, "Nice try. How much?" He was like, $15. And I was like, "Fuck off." And I left. But it got me thinking, like, the Boy Scouts are selling bags of popcorn for $15 a piece, and the girls are selling boxes of Girl Scout cookies for $2 a box. The wage gap is real, and it starts growing.
Weirdest place I performed. Wasn't necessarily that it was all that strange of a venue, but just kind of a conglomeration of weird stuff came together and made it a weird night. Last weekend, I did a show down at a bar on Capitol Hill called the Highline, and it's not an overtly satanic bar by any means, but you just kind of got the sense that like the bartender was like into Satan, like he was wearing like a pentagram T-shirt, and like there was like a sandwich board out front that like had like, you know, a normal named sandwich, and it said like, you know, like warm pastrami and fresh sauerkraut on marbled rye, yada yada. And then like down at the bottom of the sandwich description, it said like, all for the glory of Satan, like $6.66. And I was
Side
like,
of goat blood.
yeah. I was
like,
like, oh,
okay.
So just like little subtle things like that intrigued me about the place. And then we were doing a fundraiser show for the Seattle People's Harm Reduction Alliance. And so it was a whole bunch of different types of talent coming together for this fundraiser event. So it was me, several comedians. There was my buddy Tyler's on the show. He's a drag queen. There was a couple female burlesque dancers, and then there was a squad of male strippers. So just all of that. A whole
squad of them.
Yeah, a whole squad of them, a trio. But just kind of all that coming together in a mildly satanic bar was a very interesting evening. I had quite a good time.
I know one of the stories that you have, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that took place at Glow. I think it was the Whatever's Clever Variety Show.
Yeah.
So that is a show that's put on, monthly or every couple months?
Something like that, yeah.
By a local Bellingham. I think Jackie Kirsten puts that on, along with some other people, other producers through Glow. And it usually features music, comedy, and usually belly dancing as well, which is it's kind of cool. Although one time you guys were there, you had a couple comedians, and you saw some very bizarre.
Yeah, and I think I just went to watch. I don't think I was even on the show. I think Clay Christopherson was on the show. He's a local Bellingham comedian, but he and I were standing next to each other watching the act on stage, which was a burlesque dancer. I don't recall her name, but she was up there, and she got way more naked than I expected. I thought burlesque dancing was that wasn't what I was expecting. And she was up there dancing, and she had like just tassels on her breasts, and which she lit on fire, which was impressive.
Yeah. So
and
the tassels are like on fire and spinning
yeah, and
around,
then
like
she's
the little...
shaking and they're spinning, they're making little like fire donuts, and then she just had a thong on, and then she was dancing and she's working it, and then she popped a squat and pulled her thong aside and pulled out of her vagina a rolled up American flag, and then she pulled out a cigarette, lit the cigarette, unfurled the flag, lit the flag on fire with the cigarette, smoked the cigarette, threw the flaming flag on the ground, stomped it out, finished the cigarette, and then like walked off stage smoking. Yeah, and then so me and Clay were just watching that, standing next to each other, and Clay turns to me and goes, "We just witnessed like 4 crimes." So that was quite the experience there. But
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that and being like, I should have gone to that show, man.
It was something
that would have
else.
been worth it just to see that. Like,
Yeah.
that was the highlight.
That was shocking.
Yep. So you've performed in some odd places, but what to date is kind of like, I guess, what's one of your watershed/high points in comedy? Is there a favorite performance or performance space you've been at that you were like, this is amazing?
I did let's see, I could give you a couple answers. It was a very short set. I only did about 5 minutes of clean comedy at the Mount Baker Theater back in January of this year. It was part of the Bellingham's Got Talent, basically, show, and I was the only comedian in what was basically a dance show. So anything from 6-year-old tap dancing troops to very experienced ballet dancers and things like that. But and then me, the only comedian, somewhere in the middle. I performed in front of about 700 people, so that was the biggest crowd I've done. It was a very cool experience for me, just performing in front of that many people. Your pacing has to be different, your timing, just to kind of wait for all those laughs to roll in from that big of an audience. So that was really cool for me. I did my first half-hour set at a brewery in Bremerton, and I just felt like the audience was really good. The pacing of just the timing and everything worked out exactly how I wanted it to, and that was the first time I felt like I did a full half hour all from memory. The pacing was what I designed it to be, and I felt really good about that set. But those two were probably super cool ones for me that stood out.
Cool, yeah. And I mean, you and I have both done I did the talent thing at the Mount Baker Theater the year before.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is an amazing experience. You're performing on the main stage, and you know there's hundreds of people in the audience, and you can't really see them very well.
Yeah,
but
you can only see the first 50.
It gives you that small taste of what it might be like to be a true professional in a large performance space like that, where you say the laugh, and then you just hear the laughter roll in, and you got to wait for it to die down. And you're like, whoa, there's so many people laughing. It's just kind of like,
and just things, when you're performing in front of 20 people who are half paying attention at a bar, and you say something and half of them will laugh, so that's 10 people laughing. But then you say something on a stage of that size and you have 700 people laughing. It's crazy. And I would make these offhand compliments that usually get a couple of chuckles, and it was just laughter for what felt like forever, and I was like, this is crazy.
Yep.
But those two sets were really cool. I also felt really good about just Monday's open mic, this last one at the Green Frog this week. Felt really cool for me. I kind of opened up and talked a little bit about my divorce that I'd gone through.
That's right, yeah.
That was kind of something I'd been sitting on for the whole time I've been doing stand-up, because I started writing jokes during my first marriage and kind of as I was going through my divorce, and had never really had the balls or the... I felt like I didn't have the stage presence developed enough yet to do something that honest and truthful, and I was just kind of going for other jokes and finding my voice first. But Monday's open mic felt really good. Kind of got to get a little more truthful and honest up there.
Now, how long were you married for?
The first time I was married for... Well, we got divorced at, I think, the 13th month mark, but it takes 90 days for it to finalize. So 8 months in, we were kind of working there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
The story about that is you met in the trunk of a car, right?
Yeah. Which is, she was a friend of a friend that I hadn't met, and we had too many people for a car. They were driving around picking people up, and there's too many people for the seats of the car, so her and I ended up in the trunk. And just... got married real quick. Don't marry anyone you met in the trunk of a car. That's my advice. It was weird time in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never fostered any sort of close relationship to anyone I've met I've never met anyone in the trunk
Yeah,
of
I
a
was
car.
going to say,
Actually.
how many
just
trunks of
something
cars have you met people in?
No. Usually you're in there by yourself and screaming for your life and, you know.
Well, through the gag.
Yeah. I saw Goodfellas. I know how that ends. They just stab the guy repeatedly. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, you got blood. Oh, it was we hit a deer.
Yeah, my first marriage was like that, but the stabbing was in the heart.
Oh.
I think kids are funny though, because kids have like a lot of questions about life, and they don't have any like frame of reference. Like if you tell them something, they just have to believe you. You're never going to hear a kid be like, "Oh, it sounds like a lie." What I'm saying is, I lie to children a lot. Not in like big ways they're gonna like fuck them up, but like little silly ways. They're gonna have like weird outlooks on life for a while. I was talking to this little kid one time. We were watching Game of Thrones. Because I'm an awesome babysitter. But we're kicking back, we're watching Game of Thrones, and in the show there's these creatures called dire wolves. And the kid looks at me and he goes, "Brady, what's a dire wolf?" So that's a good question. A dire wolf is like a regular wolf, but more urgent. I like that joke too.
Just tell me, what was your religious upbringing like? How involved in church were you, and how conservative was your family?
I would say my family was very conservative. There's still, my mom is still very conservative, but she's learning to open up more as me and my brother throw more of life at her, and because she's religion from my mom has I feel like been a negative, kind of detrimental, heavy influence on her life. It for a lot of people, religion, they find comfort in it, and because life can be scary and depressing for everybody, and a lot of people find religion helps them through that, empowers them, gives them a sense of purpose and courage to face all that kind of stuff. But for my mom, it's always been more of a you always have to be checking if the activity you're doing is sinful, and you can't be having too much fun because you're probably doing something wrong. And so it's always been of that just kind of heavy, depressive side of things for my mom. But my mom and my dad got divorced when I was a junior in high school.
And you went to Lynden Public or Lynden Christian?
Lynden Public.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, they got divorced the summer between my junior and senior year. I was actually away on a church mission trip, and I came back, and my dad's bags were packed, and it was kind of, very, like, cinematic moment, and I was crying, and but... Yeah, so my parents got divorced. My dad is kind of had like a midlife crisis. He like bought a truck before my parents were officially divorced. He'd like started to move out, and he like bought this truck that we couldn't afford, and then they had to like take the truck back. My grandparents got involved. Like, what are you doing? And it had like a gas pedal that was shaped like a bare foot. It was all like pimped out. It was kind of gross. But and then he was in the middle of this midlife crisis.
He ran away?
Yeah, he ran away. He disappeared for a couple of weeks, and we didn't know where he was, and I guess he was crashing in hotels and stuff, and we talked to him at one point on the phone, and he said the Russians were after him.
What?
He was just kind of mentally tanking for a while, and we checked him into a psychiatric hospital somewhere down south. A lot of these facts I don't remember several months of my life. I kind of just like blocked it out because it was so traumatic apparently. But my mom and my aunts and uncles will like tell me stuff happened, and I'm like, oh, I have no memory of any of that. So then they officially got divorced, and he remarried right away. He knew someone from work, I guess. She's my stepmom. I don't really talk to them all that much.
Would you say your father was more religious than your mom?
No, my mom was certainly more religious than my dad. All growing up, my dad, once they split up, he kind of became this. He got like a tattoo, which he thought was cool, but also he hid it from my grandparents for the longest time, and it was just really funny to see my dad as a guy in his late 40s hiding a tattoo from his parents, and he bought a motorcycle and thought he was hot shit for a while, and then his motorcycle got repossessed. But so he was always more relaxed and hands off as a parent, and I don't think he cared that much about religion. But my mom was always very
Brought up in that.
uptight. Yeah.
And what denomination were you guys? You're Christian, but
Yeah, non-denominational, really. We went to a few different churches because we moved around a lot, like I said. So we went to
Right.
several different churches growing up, but we were mostly non-denominational. We weren't anything in particular.
when you went back to Lynden, though, the part of your life growing up in Lynden, you pretty much go to the same church the whole time?
Yeah, I went to Grace Baptist up in Lynden for, like I said, I moved up there in 8th grade. So 8th grade, all of high school. I was very involved in the church up there. So went to adult church and kids church on Sunday mornings. On Thursday afternoons, we did youth group. On Wednesday afternoons, we did Awanas, which stands for Approved Workmen Are Not Ashamed. But I was
I didn't know
basically, yeah, it's from, I'm not sure what verse, but probably something in Romans. But basically, I was a leader of like little kids, and they said Bible verses and got badges. It's like Boy Scouts for church kids. But I went on mission trips and was super involved in the youth group there. But
Where's the coolest place you went on a mission trip?
all of our mission trips were, at least through that church, we went up to Gold River, British Columbia, and there's a First Nations reservation up there. So I went up there, I think, 3 years consecutively.
How far north of like Vancouver is that?
Oh,
Or
it's
this area. Pretty rural, quite up.
Yeah,
quite a
pretty
ways up there.
rural. It's like 10 hours north of Lynden, I feel
Oh,
like.
wow,
I think
okay.
it was like an 8 or 10 hour
That's
drive.
solid. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty far up there. But yeah, we hung out. We developed a relationship with these people up there and kind of put on like Bible kids camps and
That's cool.
traded culture. It was fun.
I think the lamest field trip you could have been. All right, kids, we're going to see Joe Woolley today. It's like, this is not. I want to go to Costa Rica. This is bull crap. I don't know what.
But yeah, so it wasn't anything super exotic, but they were good people. It was a fun time. I had a good experience up there.
But in general, the conservative nature of your family was very much like we're going to shield you from all this stuff.
Yeah.
So like I don't know, like what's the I mean, besides not being exposed to like secular entertainment like movies or TV shows, like was there anything like even books? I mean, there's stuff you couldn't read, like how
Yeah, I mean, like growing up, I had just a few books, a few movies, and most of my books had some sort of parable or teaching message in them. So I really wasn't exposed to anything, even like kids' cartoons until like high school. But like I remember one time when I was probably like 10. I lived in California at the time, and my neighbor, his name was Justin, and he was kind of like the cool kid, the bad influence on me. But he wanted me to come over and watch an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, True Lies.
Oh yeah,
And
that's a good one.
I still haven't seen it to this day, actually. But so he was like, yeah, we should watch True Lies. And I was like, okay. So I went over to my mom, and I knew she was going to say no, but I was like, hey, can I watch a movie? And she was like, what's it called? And I said, True Lies. She didn't know anything about it. She didn't know it was a rated R action movie. She just said, no, you can't, because lies aren't true. And I was like, so if it was titled something else, I would have gotten away with it. But
Yeah.
yeah, if it was called like Redemption or something,
Yeah.
it would have been a go.
That's crazy.
But yeah,
Jesus died for our sins. That's the name of the movie, Mom.
Yeah.
Starring Arnold Schwarzenegger.
yeah. I'll be back.
That's right. In 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think when most people think about successful comedians who've come from a religious background, a lot of people will think first about Sam Kinison, who was a former Pentecostal preacher. More recently, a lot of people from his podcast and he's got his HBO series now, Crashing.
Such a good show.
Pete Holmes also came from a very Christian background before he got into stand-up. So when you started doing comedy, were there any concerns from your friends or family? Did you acknowledge those concerns, or did you just not care? Like, how did that go when your parents found out you were doing stand-up?
My mom has been to, I think it was my very first show at the Upfront. She came to see that. Her feedback was, you were pretty good. Everyone else was filthy and I couldn't stand them, but you were okay. My dad has been to one or two of my shows. And since then, neither of them know anything about what I do really in comedy, other than I might have a show coming up. But
Like they don't know the context of your material.
no,
Okay.
no. I think my mom would probably be very uncomfortable with, especially like the divorce stuff I was talking about, and
Right.
as I get more comfortable on stage and talk about more topics, I think my mom would probably be uncomfortable. But there hasn't really been any objection because there hasn't really been involvement other than as I was starting to like get on stage a little bit and also try to find my voice in Facebook posts and just kind of test out some jokes on Facebook. My mom hadn't had a Facebook, and then she got a Facebook, and she had it for about like 3 months. And then I posted something, I don't remember what it was, and my mom commented on it, like not even messaged me, just like commented like, what would Jesus think of this? Like, just think about how you're representing the gospel. And I was like, that's not what I'm trying to do here in the moment. And so she got off Facebook. I scared my mom off Facebook, so she doesn't have one anymore. But yeah, so I think after that she just didn't want to be involved in my artistic pursuits.
Okay. Did you have any friends who were fairly religious that you stayed in touch with who were like, oh, that's cool you're doing that, or anyone who, or I guess even, I don't know how religious your wife is, your current wife now, but I mean, is there any, I guess when you started doing comedy, was there any sort of like, oh, okay? I
feel like, and my wife has put it this way, that my current wife and I have both gotten less religious over time. We've been married for coming up on 4 years, actually, like next month. But so in the beginning, she was uncomfortable with the fact that I would get on stage and lie or exaggerate. And she's like, that's not true. That didn't happen. And I was like, yeah, but it's a good story, or it's based in truth. And I just kind of embellished it. So she was uncomfortable with it at first, but now she's gotten used to it. And now I'll spin a yarn at her, and she's like, when did that happen? I was like, I made it up. And she's like, oh, that was a good story.
There you go.
When I was in high school, I was involved in a guys' Bible study group. Ooh, yeah. And our focus was on purity. So we vowed that we weren't going to have sex with women, which really wasn't our choice. And we were also going to try really hard not to jack off. And to enforce that, we had this accountability group where we got together once a week, and we had to tell each other if we jacked off, and if so, how many times. Which now that I'm an adult, I'm like, it's so fucked up. Like, it's just what we did back then, and I can't change the past. So, like, the guilt worked for me, though. Like, it really resonated with me, and I didn't want to, like, tell people I jacked off, and I couldn't lie about it, because then I'd go to hell. So I was like, I just won't do it. And I hadn't jacked off in like 5 months, you guys. I was doing good. I was on what we call a winning streak, because I was a loser. And all the other guys were like really jealous. They're like, man, how's he doing that? He's amazing. He's like a saint. He's like the Mother Teresa of not touching his genitals. Now that I said that, I hope that Mother Teresa's the Mother Teresa of not touching her genitals. Whatever. So, like, I was doing good, but then one day my balls started hurting, and I was like, oh, that's a problem. So I went to, my family had this big bookshelf, and I went to the bookshelf, and I pulled a book off the shelf, our Family Medical Dictionary, and I started flipping through it, and I'm passing all the pictures that I had previously jacked off to, like vaginal discharge, a pretty good one, rash on the areola. This guy knows what I'm talking about. Like anything that was like a minor skin irritant, or around the privates was gold. Porn was not as easy as it is now. That's my main message here. So I'm flipping through it, and I'm like, okay, what's my ailment? What do I got? And then I realized, oh my God, I have testicular cancer. Self-diagnosis, but pretty sure that's what it is. So I took the book to my dad, and I didn't even say anything. I just held it up. And my dad was like, oh, okay, we'll take you to the doctor. So we go to the doctor, and then I'm in the doctor's office by myself, and the doctor's taking a knee. And he's got like the big, thick jewelry inspecting monocle on, because he's inspecting my jewels. And he goes, son, when was the last time you masturbated? And I was like, oh, sir, I assure you, I do not participate in that shameful behavior. And the doctor, who was a medical professional, laughed in my face. And he said, son, you should start masturbating. He said, I don't know if you know this, but boys your age produce a lot, like so much semen every day. You gotta get that out. And I was like, okay, that was the first I'd heard of that, because I was told not to. So I went home and I cleared the pipes. And then the next week at our purity meeting, I had to report back and confess that I had sinned 36 times. doctor's orders.
But how much of that joke is true? I mean, is that
That joke is 100% true.
100%? That's one where it's like, nope, that's
Yep, that is all true. Our whole, we had probably 6 or 8 guys who would regularly meet as, and we did this freshman, sophomore, junior, most of senior year. We kind of started to disband like senior year, but all the way through high school, we'd meet after school on Wednesdays and just talk about how we are supposed to be avoiding lust. And we were, in the very beginning, we were kind of debating on what to call the group, and we were like, well, what should we call it? And I suggested SWAT, S-W-A-T, and it could stand for So What Are Testicles? But it was just all about purity and not looking at girls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then, but I mean, so you really would, the rash on the areola, that would happen.
Oh yeah.
It's
It's
like
haunting.
when you become hormone consumed, horny teenager,
no
whatever
outlet
works,
for it.
whatever you can.
I didn't have magazines. I couldn't go on the internet because the family computer was in the living room. So medical dictionary.
All right. That's it. And the doctor really was kind of like, I suggest you start.
Yeah. I was terrified for my life. I thought I had testicular cancer. I went to the doctor, and he was like, "You're stupid. Just masturbate. What are you doing?" I like how I went to my dad, and my dad didn't suggest that. My dad was like, "We have to go to the doctor."
Yeah.
I don't know what's wrong with you.
Wow.
Yeah.
I haven't masturbated in years.
Yeah.
I don't even use it anymore. All right. You and your wife have gradually become less religious. I mean, what's your faith and religious life look like now?
We don't really attend church all that much anymore. We were going to a certain, what could be considered mega church here in town. For a couple of years we went there, and kind of what stopped us from going there was we were starting to rub people the wrong way, because I feel like we were too open-minded maybe, and brought too many harmful ideas into the mix. But we started going to this. They had a group again in the evenings, and after an extracurricular church group. It was pitched as a group for young adults who are trying to learn more about their faith. And I enjoy studying religion in general. Any religion, I think it's interesting. So I was like, cool, we can have like deeper conversations that aren't just these Sunday school answers and aren't just surface level stuff, and we can kind of dig into this stuff. So I was pretty on board in the beginning, and I ended up in this group of, they were young adults, but at the time I was probably 25, and everyone else in the group was like 20, 21. So I was several years older than everyone, and we would split off into groups of guys and girls, because you can't mingle, and then me and the guys would have these small group conversations. And I started just trying to, I didn't want to be the leader, but I kind of started throwing out ideas, and the guys were responding what I thought was positively, and so we were having cool conversations, in my opinion. And then one of the pastors of the church actually pulled my wife and I aside, because we were essentially leading our own small groups, even though that wasn't our intent.
Yeah.
And pulled us aside and said, hey, I thought you guys would be good in this gathering setting, because you guys would be leaders. And I was like, I didn't want to be a leader. I came here to just kind of spitball and to learn from people who have studied more. But so that wasn't my intention at all. And he said, well, here's the thing. You are being leaders, but you're leading people in the wrong direction. Ooh. So it's kind of the best backhanded compliment I've ever received. But so he kind of asked us to stop coming. So we stopped attending the church after that.
You know, when you read the Bible, you're supposed to like read a passage and then like reflect on it and then like figure out what you learned. So I wanted to do that. And I picked up a Bible and I opened up to a random passage, because I figure anything can teach me something. And I was flipping through it, and I opened up to Acts chapter 11, verse 2, which says, when Peter went up to Jerusalem, the circumcision party criticized him. What I learned was people threw horrible parties back then. It's pretty funny. Hey, you guys want to hang out and get a dick snipped? Sounds like a party to me.
Do you believe in God? Do you believe in an afterlife? Or
I think that was one of the first things that kind of freaked me out, because I grew up in church. I went to church every Sunday my whole life growing up, and I went to Bible college too. And somewhere, either during Bible college or shortly after Bible college, I was sitting in a church service, and, my whole life it was like, where do you go when you die? You go to heaven if you're a Christian. And someone brought that up, and they said, what does the afterlife look like for you? And I just thought, nothing, I'm dead. And then I realized, like, holy crap, like, I don't believe in an afterlife. And that really freaked me out for a long time, and because that was just my gut response, is there's nothing. And then so I had to kind of wrestle and cope with that this trained response that I'd been given my whole life wasn't my natural or my actual response when presented with that question. And then I had to think about, is that what I actually think?
I ended up talking to this pastor, and I probably shouldn't use his real name, but I'm gonna. It was Pastor Thaddeus Rexilius, but he was trying to be all like cool and hip, and he's like, you can call me Pastor T-Rex. And I was like, oh, that's cool, man, I like dinosaurs. And he went, hold on now, dinosaurs didn't exist. And I was like, oh, you know what's cool and hip? Facts. Science is pretty legit too, man. He didn't like that. But I think it's fun to poke people about like things that they like hold dear to their hearts. I'm probably a dick for doing it, but this one time I got in this argument with this lady on Facebook because she was a mother, and she posted, she said, I reserve the right to not vaccinate my children. And I said, that's fine, they're your kids, you can do that. But if you reserve the right to not vaccinate your children, then I reserve the right to say, I told you so, at their funerals.
I essentially work for the Catholic Church. I work for a recovery center that is Catholic themed, kind of. Okay. I've worked for essentially churches in the past. So I don't have any issue with religion. I think religion can bring about a lot of positive things for people, but I also enjoy critical thinking. Yes. So and open discussion and things like that. So yeah, I think you can have a positive impact and be a good person without having to necessarily ascribe to every single belief of the church.
And I mean, like growing up, were you kind of in that part of Christianity that was taught like to interpret the Bible and all its stories literally, as opposed to maybe their parables?
I would say that the churches that I went to were more on the literal side. Maybe not every single thing was literal interpretation, but more on the literal side. And that was one of the things growing up as I got older. I was like, I cannot be a literal interpretation. My wife and I, after we left that one church, or were asked to leave that one church, we started going to an Episcopal church, and their Episcopalians are much less literal. So I really enjoy the Episcopalian doctrine. Actually, they have gay ministers. They perform gay weddings. Less literal, more about the meaning or about the the underlying message than like these things actually happen. So yeah. I was a lot more on board with that, but we haven't really been going there recently either.
Okay. Do you think there's a separate circle of hell for comedians?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I don't believe in an afterlife, but most comedians need a place to sit and think about what they've done.
Do you feel like coming from a religious background gives you an opportunity to be more versatile when it comes to performing different places? Like, you feel like you're maybe just as likely to be considered for a church fundraiser with like a little light comedy as opposed to just a normal showcase that's at a bar?
Yeah. It's opened me up to... When I first started comedy, I wasn't intending to do clean comedy. I was intending to joke about whatever I wanted to joke about, which led down some not so wholesome paths. But I don't think my comedy is super filthy. It's just not always family friendly. But then recently, I got asked to do a 20-minute set at a local fundraiser thing, and it was for elderly people and like high school kids and some younger children too. And I was like, yeah, I'll wing it. I'll give it a shot. And at first it was, can you do like 10 minutes? And I was like, I can probably come up with 10 minutes of clean material. Mm-hmm. And then a few days before it was like, hey, how about 20 minutes? And I was like, ooh, that's quite a bit more. But it wasn't perfect, but I enjoyed the challenge, and I put together 20 clean minutes, and I proved to myself that I could do it. So,
do you feel like a lot of when you go to these churches, obviously if you're there for a stand-up event, it's clear that you're going to perform comedy, but do you ever end up with any speaking engagement at churches where you're there for a more traditional reason, and people have no idea that you do jokes?
Yeah, so I work, like I said, basically for the Catholic Church, but I, through my work, have done different, basically, fundraising for charity speeches at churches, and I wasn't raised Catholic, so going to Catholic churches was kind of an adjustment for me. But I've delivered more professional speeches at Catholic churches, and they've been welcoming. People have said that I intonated well and had good voice inflection and that kind of stuff, and I credit that towards comedy, because I never liked public speaking before comedy. But so yeah, they have no idea what my background is and wouldn't like most of my stuff, but they thought there in the moment for that speaking engagement that I did great. So
are the speeches more related to your job, like as far as recovering from substance abuse? Is that
for recovering from substance abuse and local Catholic charities all over the country, actually, but based on the communities that I'm attending the mass in at the time. So they're actually geared specifically for different counties and different regions. But yeah.
Are you writing your own speeches, or is it something where
No, it's I kind of improvise a little and make it my own, but it's something that someone else wrote for me. And we kind of go out and do these speeches as an organized team. But yeah.
But is it something, even where you come from, maybe having a more reduced level of faith personally, is it something where do you ever find yourself like do you believe the words you're saying?
Like I said, I wasn't raised Catholic, so there's aspects and certain words in there that don't come as naturally to me. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I'm like, oh, I wasn't raised with that word. Like when I got to the first church that I spoke at, I walked up and I introduced myself. I said, I'm here to deliver the speech on behalf of this organization. And they said, oh, you're going to be speaking from the AMBO. And I was like, oh, and they just kind of gestured to the stage, but there was 3 places on the stage where there were mics. And so I was like, I pointed to one of them. I was like, that's the AMBO, right? And they were like, no, that's the AMBO. And I was like, oh, and apparently that means step up or like elevated in Greek or something. But I didn't grow up in Catholic churches, so I didn't know that. But it's basically a podium, a specific one where they speak from. So I didn't know like that kind of terminology. But I think that I might not agree with or know the terminology, but I think that doing good in the world is obviously a good thing. So yeah, I believe in that part of it.
The overall message is something you're behind. Yeah,
for sure.
Okay. How often now you said you work at basically a recovery center, substance abuse place. How often does this stand-up come up? I mean, I imagine your coworkers are aware that you do comedy. Like, how are they pretty chill about it? Have they come to your shows? Are they...
Yeah, so I do a number of different things at my job, but my role is I'm kind of support staff in the sense that I'm very much behind the scenes. I do a lot of data entry and records collection, and I'm kind of off in a corner, and I'm very quiet and respectful and polite and professional at work. And then my supervisor was like, hey, I want to come to one of your shows. And people say they want to come to shows all the time and they never show up. So I was like, sure. And he came to one of my shows and I was like, oh, we're doing it. I'm going to stick to the material. And so I was up there, I was telling jokes, and you can see out, it was a very small, intimate room, and it was well lit, and I could see him, and he looked very uncomfortable the whole time, and he kind of shook my hand and left real quick after the set. But then on Monday at work, he was like, that was a whole other side of you that I never expected. So he's like, I only know quiet professional, Brady, and you were talking about your dick a lot. So.
A little bit about me. I went to Bible college. And so that surprises a lot of people because I actually went to seminary and I was going to grow up and become a pastor, but then I realized that you can't be a pastor and tell dick jokes, so quit. But so this one time at Bible college, I was this classmate of mine. She was this girl. She invited me on a walk out in the woods, and she's like, "Hey, we should go on a walk." And I didn't read the situation properly. I didn't realize it was like a define the relationship moment. And I was like, "Yeah, let's do that." So we went on a walk out in the woods. And we're out there, and she goes, hey, Brady, I've been praying, and I just want to let you know, God told me that we're supposed to get married. And I was like, oh. But the cool thing about like church logic is you can use God to get into or out of anything you want. So I was like, oh, that's interesting that God told you that, because God told me that I'm not supposed to date anyone for a while. He also told me that you're not that hot. Maybe if you were hotter, he'd be more into it. But I don't know. Who's to say? His ways are higher than our own.
You know, your instinctual reaction is you don't really believe in an afterlife. So, I mean, do you believe that the universe, like, you think that there's maybe a grand creator out there, or do you find yourself leaning more towards atheism or agnosticism, or?
Yeah, I would say I find myself leaning more towards that. I don't know. I guess I'm not going to say that there's not a God. In my personal experience, I guess one of the things that there's the whole like, oh, I don't naturally, or I guess I realized I didn't believe in heaven, so that whole thing happened. And then another moment that kind of stood out to me was after Bible college, I felt like I was like a super Christian, like like on a spiritual mountaintop, and could take on anybody, and convince any atheist that that they like have a conversation with them and they'd turn to the Lord and all this stuff. And then I started watching, because I didn't know a lot of atheist people because I had such a strong church background. So I started watching YouTube videos and stuff of atheists saying their point of view, and I was like, holy cow, they raise a lot of good questions and good points. And so I kind of did there's a story in the Bible, it doesn't really have a title, but people refer to it as like Gideon's fleece. This guy named Gideon believed that God was telling him to do something, and so he laid out some lamb's wool. He laid out a fleece on the ground and told God that if he woke up in the morning and it was wet and the ground around it was dry, then he would know it was a sign from God. And so he wakes up the next morning and it was like that. And then he thinks about it and he goes, no, that makes sense, because the dew would collect on the fleece and everything else would dry up. So he goes, okay, do it the other way. If the fleece is dry and everything else is wet, then I'll know, because that's more weird. And so then that happened, and he's like, okay, now I know it's a sign from God. So I kind of did several personal Gideon's fleeces in my life, not anything too out there, too fantastic, too crazy or supernatural, but just like, hey, if these things happen, which they've happened before, they're not that out of the ordinary, but they're also not common events. If these things happen, then I'll know that, God is out there, and those things didn't happen. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe, like, and that was kind of my, like, I'm having a moment of doubt. I need this to happen if I'm going to keep believing, and it didn't happen. So I was like, oh, okay.
Can you remember or any of those single ones at this point, or what those were?
It sounds kind of weird, but twice previously in like the 2 years or so leading up to this, I'd never seen this before, but I was like walking down the street. I do a lot of just walking out and about, and I was walking down the street and I saw people applying crosswalks on the street, which I'd never seen before. They like lay down a white, like it's like a piece of like plastic, or it's like a white sheet, those bars of the crosswalk, and then they like flamethrower it on, and so they and it goes on. And I'd never seen that before, and I'd seen it like twice within the previous 2 years, and I was like, so that's something that's uncommon, but I'm totally likely to see that out and about. So if I see that at some point within the next like 6 months, so my standards were real low, and it still never happened. So I to this day have not seen that happen again. So.
Yeah. Like the people applying the crosswalks had like wings on, it's like John Travolta in that.
Just applying it with heavenly fire.
Yeah, that movie. What's that movie? Is it Michael? Is that where he's an angel, or is that Phenomenon? The one where he's an angel.
I'm not sure.
He has these massive wings and somehow disguises them underneath a trench coat.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like,
yeah,
what?
Yeah. The old wings in the trench coat gag.
Yes.
I'm from Bellingham. There's a local puppy breeding place up there, and they got like a bunch of puppies, like a fuck ton of puppies, you guys. They sell these puppies for $7,000 a piece. I heard that and I was like, oh shit. So I came up with like a scheme, and if anyone wants to join me in this scheme, just come up to me after the show. We'll get you in on the ground level of this. But I figure like some of us will just like roll into this puppy farm under the cover of darkness and just like load up a minivan with like $100,000 worth of puppies. It'll be the most adorable heist ever. I did the math on it, though. To steal $100,000 worth of puppies, we need to steal 14.3 of them. 15. Let's round up to 15 whole puppies. I don't think anyone will buy like a third of a puppy. That'd be really weird. Like, yeah, can I get everything from here down?
So, I mean, being that you come from a religious background, is there anything you won't talk about on stage? Even just not worrying about the religious aspect of things, just from a personal perspective. Is there anything where you draw a line and you're like, I'm not going to, you talked about just getting to a place where you could discuss your divorce. Mm-hmm. Is there anything still you're like, I'm not going to go there?
A lot of my jokes are kind of in short story form, and a lot of it is about things that have happened to me personally. I've actually done shows before, and an audience member will come up and be like, do you actually tell jokes? Because what you're doing isn't jokes. I'm like, oh, well, just kind of my short stories. But so in those short stories, I haven't yet touched on every touchy subject, and I don't feel compelled like I need to touch on every single hot button issue, but if it came up, I would talk about it. I feel like you can talk about pretty much anything as long as you handle it tastefully. I was watching a Jim Jeffries Freedom special, and he starts out with like a 10-minute joke about Bill Cosby and right. date rape and that kind of stuff. And so I started watching the special. I got like a half hour into it, and then my wife came home, and I said, this is a great special. He's doing really great. He starts off with 10 minutes on rape, and it's a really good bit. And my wife goes, you can't have a good rape joke. And I was like, no, like, check it out. So I started it over, and she sat down and she watched the whole special with me, and she said, that was really good. He handled that well. So I think as long as you're coming at it from you're not punching down, and you're coming at topics from a positive perspective, I think you can discuss or joke about anything.
So how important are you overall as stand-up in your life? If you suddenly couldn't do it, would it be a real bummer?
Yeah, it would be. After high school, like I said, kind of the whole theme of this is that I grew up pretty religious. So my friends were all church friends, and then I went to Bible college, and those were my peers. And then I came back and kind of started to question a lot of things, and started to think my own things, and got asked to leave a church and that kind of stuff. But so my group of peers kind of disappeared, and I'm naturally very an introverted person, and so when that happened for several years, I would just go to work and come home and watch TV and be by myself. Some of that was with my wife, and we're both very much homebodies. She likes to read, and I like to write, and we just kind of hang out at home. But I didn't have a large social circle, and I was very much go to work, come home, and that's it. And so comedy has really opened me up as far as getting out there and meeting people, and I feel like it's completely changed me as a person, as far as boosting my confidence and my ability to think on my feet and to have a voice just in everyday life, because I was most of my life I've been very much just an observer and not a contributor. So comedy's helped me find a voice in that regard. So I intend to continue doing it.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, like, ultimately, if you could make a career out of it, would you do that?
Yeah,
Is that something
it'd be that's the goal. You kind of have to play the long game in comedy, at least as from what I've learned so far. But that's the goal, is to stick with it and see how far it goes. But yeah, I
feel like you're very good. I mean, I noticed just the other night on Facebook, I looked and I was like, wow, you have like well over 1,000 friends, like a lot of friends.
Yeah, I got like 2,100 Facebook friends
crazy.
Or something.
And just realizing that you are probably very as proactive as anyone in the scene as far as when it comes to networking. And I don't network as well as I could. It's something that you, after a certain point of doing this, you realize that's necessary to kind of continue branching out and getting somewhere with it. But I think you're very good at that.
Yeah,
so.
just that's how I've gotten on all my shows, is just networking mostly through Facebook and connecting with people. Because I laid the groundwork on Facebook, it got me more comfortable to do it in person too, but just connecting with comedians at mics and showcases and whatever. And the more shows you get on, the more opportunities you have. So.
A few years ago, my wife and I, we both got new phones, but they were different phones from each other. So this one day we were hanging out in the mall food court and we were arguing over who had the better phone. We're like, my phone can do this, my phone can do that. And my wife goes, okay, check this out. She pulls out her phone and she goes, okay, Google, what time is this show that we want to watch? What time is this show on? And this guy was just walking past in the mall food court and he stopped and he looked at us and he said, that show is on at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. And then he kept walking. And my wife was like, did you see that? My phone just conjured a man out of thin air to answer my question. Can your phone do that? And I was like, no. So she clearly has the better phone here.
So what's the closest you've ever come to dying? Like either intentionally or unintentionally? What's like
intentionally?
Yeah, I mean it could be.
Yeah, that's true. I've never stuck a gun in my mouth, but I probably one of the closest times I've ever come to dying was last summer. It was right before a comedy show, actually, a few hours beforehand.
You would have ruined the show if you died.
I know. I would or made it better.
Or made it
Brady's not here. But I was out swimming with some friends and got caught in, it looked like just a big, deep, still pool of water, but there was a lot of undercurrents in it. And I got just kind of pushed around and stuck in the middle of this pool, and I was treading water and couldn't get out of it and panicked. And I'm a decent swimmer, but I was just like, in my head was playing all these like news clips of like people drowning, and their friends were like, he was such a strong swimmer, I just don't understand. And then the other side of my brain was like, you're not even that strong of a swimmer. And so I was starting to panic, but I gradually swam my way out of it. But it was pretty scary. I was close to drowning.
was that on the Nooksack or was that?
It was down near Oso where that landslide was.
Yep.
Yeah, I was down there.
Okay, yeah. The other question is, and this could be either an irrational fear or a rational fear, or both, depending on how many fears and phobias you have. But what do you fear most in life?
I was going to say bombing, but I mean, I do that regularly enough. It's not that scary. I guess it would just be maybe investing all this time and energy into comedy and not being as successful as I would hope at it.
Okay, so fear of failure.
Yeah, fear of failure in general, I guess. Yeah. Other areas of life too. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I did this for the first couple, and then I kept forgetting. But I try to ask the comedians to come up with their own outro music, just something, anything, that they could, anything that they want to do musically to end the show.
Like actual music? Or like...
Well, and I mean, it could be anything. I mean, I guess telling people that in advance, they could even bring a guitar. So you could do anything if there's any stupid, anything, the stupider the better.
Let's see. When I come up with songs when I'm driving by myself in the car, and I'm not musically inclined, but I'll just start like saying stuff, and then I'll put it to a beat. I'm realizing that I can't say any of them on the air right now, though, so they're very inappropriate. I don't know. I was going to like rub my nipple on the microphone, but I shouldn't do that either. I don't know. Wah, 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 wah. Okay, I'm done.
Cool. Well, my thanks to Brady Secules for being on the program. If you'd like to contact us, you can message us or comment on the Are You Serious Facebook page. You can also check us out. The podcasts are posted to SoundCloud. We'll be back next week with another installment, but until then, I'm Matt Benoit for Are You Serious? And be sure to keep it right here for more great local programming on KMRE 102.3 FM Bellingham.